Hi and welcome back to BookTube with Amy. This is my latest weekly wrap up. The first book that I want to talk about I did as a buddy read, and I buddy read it with Ange from Angie's Book Chatter because I am incapable of reading a book without her these days. I feel like we have so many buddy reads, and it's unintentional buddy reads sometimes. It will just be that I'll be texting her, but like, oh, I'm reading this book, and then she wants to read it, so she'll read it, or vice versa. So it's pretty much a joint channel at this stage. And I also buddy read it with Emily from Novelle Novels. So the two of them had planned to buddy read it together, and then Ange kindly asked me if I wanted to join, and I did. So we read Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stewart. No drama on the channel, please. We're not having Shuggie 2.0. I absolutely loved it, so didn't be holding out for that. I was a bit apprehensive going into this book because we know that literary fiction just isn't really my thing, and we also know that it is Angie's favouriteest book of all time, so you know the stakes were high for me to really enjoy this book. I think if I turned around and had says to her, listen, wasn't really a fan of it, and I was to do my usual scathing sweary reviews, I would probably be a subscriber and a friend down. Thankfully that didn't happen. I really enjoyed this book and I am so glad that I read it. In the beginning of the book I was really struggling to connect with both Agnes and Shuggie, and so I was starting to get that dready feeling because I was like, I feel like if I don't connect to them as characters, then the book isn't going to have as much an emotional impact on me as it otherwise would have. And I think that it is one of the book's shortcomings, is that it's a bit of a slow build in the beginning. I didn't feel like we necessarily needed the amount of build up that we got. However, I appreciate the fact that Douglas Stewart was trying to give us time to get to know these characters. However, I think that one of the best ways to get to know a character is just through their character development. I think that it would have been far better if he just flung us into the story. However, that being said, when I did finally connect to Agnes and Shuggie, it was just, it was a phenomenal book. I completely and utterly understand the hype, and I completely and utterly understand why Ange chats about it every 5 minutes to anybody who will listen. It was a really, I was going to say lovely book, and I feel like that's no the case because the book is certainly no lovely, but it was brilliant. It deals with some really hard-hitting topics like addiction and, you know, child neglect through an addiction to a certain extent. It really dives into what it's like to be queer and working class in Scotland, and how it feels to have nobody around you who understands that. And it was brilliant. It told this story, Agnes and her family, well, they were living on the poverty line in Glasgow while she was struggling with addiction, and it really focused around Agnes. There was only wee bits that focused around Shuggie, so I've heard Scott for Gunpowder Fiction and Plot say before that it should have been called Ariadne Spoilers, and I totally get that, it absolutely should have. But I really did enjoy it. It was really emotive at points, and I think that Douglas Stewart managed to tell a story about addiction where the addiction wasn't used to vilify Agnes. I think that although Agnes was frustrating and I didn't agree with all of her choices at points throughout the book, her addiction never vilified her. We knew, you know, that she drank for reasons, and she had a hard life for reasons, and she maybe didn't choose to deal with that in the healthiest of ways, but you still sort of feel rooted for her, and you weren't just like, back off, like, I didn't want anything to do with you because you're a jakey bitch, which happens a lot. And I really struggle to read books when it deals with addiction because I find so often that it is just used to completely vilify that character, and it doesn't really have any of the understanding that needs to come when you are dealing with someone with an addiction. So I really appreciated that, and I really appreciated all the points that Douglas Stewart hit when it came to Shuggie realising that he was gay, and you know, the struggle that Shuggie had, not only from his peers but from his family, from his teachers, because I very much believe that that is what it's like to grow up queer and working class in some areas of Scotland. So I thought it was absolutely phenomenal, and I struggled with my rating on this. I was unsure whether to give it 4 stars or whether to give it 5 stars, because the slow build up in the beginning really was holding me back for giving it that 5-star rating. Because if it was any other book and no Agnes's favourite, maybe I would have gave it a 4-star. However, I decided to sleep on it, which is something I never normally do. I'm quite a for the gut reviewer, and I decided to sleep on it, and I actually tried to start another book after I had finished Shuggie, and I just couldn't, because the character stayed with me, and I actually had to get like a day or so before I could pick anything else up, because I just couldn't stop thinking about Shuggie or Agnes and the story that Douglas Stewart told. So for that reason I ended up rating it a 5-star, because I just couldn't shake it. I think that it is potentially one of the best books I'll read this year. It was absolutely brilliant. We all know that I love to hype up Scottish authors, so like I was probably going to love it anyway, but the fact that it is a Scottish author telling the stories of working class and families on the poverty line with such great addiction representation, and you know, Shuggie was just this wee queer working class boy trying to navigate his way through life. I think that it really does tell a story, a realistic story of what it's like for some families to grow up in Glasgow. So it was amazing. I absolutely loved it, and I'm so glad that I read it, and I'm so glad that I read it with Ange and Emily. We did 50 pages a day, and then we would sort of downline our thoughts, and obviously Ange was sitting scheming like ho ho, because she knew it was coming. But it was good to share the experience of reading it for the first time with Emily, because she was sharing a lot of similar opinions and views as to how I was feeling as we were reading it. I think that if I was to have just read it with Ange on her own, then like maybe I wouldn't have had that. I would have felt a wee bit like, oh, I am not loving this, like should I be yet? So that was really good, and I think that the three of us had some really interesting chat as we went along, and it sparked some really good honest conversation between us as a trio as well. So it was absolutely brilliant, and read the book if you haven't already, but I'm pretty late to the party, so I'm sure you already have. Crash bang wallop. And then I read Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. This is one of the books that I had got for Christmas. I was so buzzing to read it, so I just had to pick it up like nearly right away after I finished the few buddy reads that I had going on in January. This is the first book that I decided I was going to read independently. So this tells the story of Ariadne, who's the Princess of Crete, and it is a feminist retelling of her myth. Now, I read and absolutely adored Circe by Madeline Miller. I think I read that 2 years ago now. So this was giving me like very similar vibes. Greek mythology retelling, check, but make it super feminist, check. Beautiful cover, check. So like, I was here for it. Unfortunately, this didn't live up to the Circe hype. This was like Circe's point missing, annoying wee sister, in my opinion. So I have a couple of issues with the book. Firstly, the beginning is so info dumpy. The book is split up into 4 parts, and part 1, which is like one of the longest parts in the book, is essentially just, and this is who this person is, and that is who that person is, and this is how they relate to this person, and this is this household, and they worship this god. And it just wasn't very engaging. It read sort of a bit like a Greek mythology textbook, which like I am interested in, and I think that if you're going to do a retelling, a Greek mythology retelling, then it should be accessible, even if people aren't aware of the original myth. So I just feel like that could have been written so much better. Cersei was fantastic, it did a brilliant job of it. You learned the characters as you go, so it was really accessible and you didn't need to know anything about it. I mean, Percy Jackson by Rick Riordan, he's done a whole series of books that are, you know, middle grades, they're geared at children, so potentially the kids don't know the origin stories of these Greek gods and goddesses, and he's made them accessible. Lore by Alexandra Bracken that I read last year, heavily accessible, so you know it can be done. This just didn't do that very well in my opinion. And then when the story got kick-started, I had a really difficult time trying to connect with Ariadne. She came off as really annoying, and some of the choices and the decisions that she makes just doesn't make sense to me with the plot that Jennifer Saint is trying to push forward. I feel like she just sort of makes similar mistakes over and over again, and it's fine if she makes the mistake the first time and then learns from it, and then we're going to have like this great brilliant feminist storyline starting where, you know, she's done the shit, learned from it, this is what we're not doing next time, and becomes like this brilliantly badass person. But that wasn't what happened at all. She done the shit, she didn't learn, and then like did the shit again. So I didn't connect with her, and therefore I didn't really care about anything that happened to her, which I mean is pretty much most of the book, innit, because it's called Ariadne. I didn't connect with a lot of the other characters in the book either. I connected with Ariadne's sister for about 5 minutes, and I thought, alright, okay, well, you know, here's a character I'll maybe get behind a wee bit more. And it was dual perspective for a while, so we're getting chapters for Ariadne's perspective, chapters for Phaedra's perspective. I was like, cool, like at least if I'm enjoying her perspective, that's something to keep me going. But that was short-lived. I think that there were a couple of points in the book that could have been really interesting. So this is going to encroach into some spoilery territory, so if you are planning to read this book and you want it to be completely spoiler free, then check out now. So there's a bit in the book where Phaedra gives birth and she's struggling to connect with the child. And so I think Jennifer Saint was trying to do like a postpartum depression type storyline, which is great and I am here for it. However, that lasted approximately a sentence and then it was just never really mentioned again. It was only really mentioned how she felt when she had gave birth. And then later on in the book, like it's sort of hinted at again, she basically goes on a trip and her kids are now with her, and she just like makes a comment like, oh, like my kids are now dripping off me or whatever, like, so like she's implying there's a distance there, but that is it. Like it is never delved into, it is never like, and then she realised she was feeling like this and that was alright and folk accepted that, and then she went and she did this and she felt better. Like there was none of that. It was literally just, by the by, doesn't really love the bairn yet, moving on. So it wasn't explored enough for it to have actually made an impact, or for me to feel like Jennifer Saint had even really made a point, other than that potentially women years and years and years ago could have felt similar to how many women feel now. But like, obviously, like I don't feel like that's a point that particularly needs to be made. And then they had another storyline with Phaedra where Phaedra basically decides that she wants to fire all up in and about her stepson. And like, weird, but okay, because because you've literally watched them grow up. But if the point for Jennifer Saint was to be like, well, back in these times the men was up and about their stepdaughters and that was fine, like, and so then now does this make you feel uncomfortable, which is a direct parallel to that, so why is that acceptable? And then it makes you think. Phenomenal. And again, here for it in a massive way. But again, it lasted a chapter and then that was it. Like, so none of the plot points that could have been potentially big feminist points, or that could have potentially made an impact or been thought-provoking for people, weren't pushed far enough for me. And I don't understand why this has been marketed as a feminist retelling, other than the fact that there are a couple of quotes in here which like are dead on. But like, is a quote enough to make it feminist? Like, if the character is thinking a really badass quote but then their actions and the rest of their storyline is the exact opposite of what they've said in that quote, is it still a feminist retelling? Because I didn't really feel like it was, to be honest. I just feel like if you're after a feminist retelling in Greek mythology, read Circe. Like, Madeline Miller made you care about Circe so much, and she put so many thought-provoking points and so much great dialogue in the book. Like, that is about 1,000 times better than Ariadne, in my opinion. I just didn't get it. And even the ending, there's obviously a couple of different endings in the actual myth. You know, I mean, we're all going for the same source material, but there are like a few different ways that Jennifer Saint could have chose to have ended this, and I don't really understand why she chose the ending she did at all, because there's another ending which could have been far better, and I feel like she really fucked up Ariadne and Dionysus's relationship in this book, because she basically just made out like Dionysus was a liar and that Ariadne was sort of too much of a coward to call him out for his lies, and just lived a wee life, and then like turns out he didn't really want her in the end. Whereas if she stuck a wee bit more to the original myth and she made them in love, and she made Ariadne know about all the stuff that Dionysus is doing and, you know, taking part in his rituals, that would be better, because then like Dionysus sees her as his equal, which is surely a far more positive message than her just being like the meek wee lied to wife, no? And like in the end, like Dionysus made Ariadne a god and like gave her this place in society because he loved her so much. Whereas in the book, like, he just pisses off without her and is like, peace bitch, bye, and then she dies. Like, so are we telling women that it is better to actually die than have a man make a place for you in society? Like, what kind of message is this? Like, or am I just that awful a feminist that like it just went right over my head? Because like this is my takeaway for this book and I don't understand it. I would be so interested to have a conversation with somebody else who has read this, because like on Goodreads nobody is agreeing with me. Everybody is like 1000% standing this book and I just do not get it. Like, it was dire, and for that reason rated it 1 star. So that is everything that I read this week. Hopefully you're enjoying everything that you're reading at the moment, and if you've read any of these books, chat to me in the comments down below. Can't wait to geek out with these. Thanks for watching. Bye.